A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Look forward to an outstanding conversation. You'll be enlarged in your understanding of what's going on in the nation by listening in carefully today. An important conversation about freedoms, and especially academic freedom, and a major win in the Fair Work Commission. Adelaide law professor and the 2024 Australian Mother of the Year, Dr. Joanna Howe, has won an important case against the University of Adelaide. Joanna Howe has been subjected to 6 different investigations undertaken by her employer since 2019, largely because of her pro-life position and issues around sexuality and gender. The latest investigation accused her of research misconduct. And even though she was cleared of any breaches, she was then required to undertake a course on bias in research. But Joanna Howe has refused. Get ready for a conversation about what universities really teach and the tensions around pro-life issues, sexuality and gender. Dr. Joanna Howe is Professor of Law and Associate Dean in Research at the Adelaide Law School at the University of Adelaide. I mentioned she is the 2024 Australian Mother of the Year. She's a mother of 5. Joanna Howe, I want to make a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you. So wonderful to be here, Neil.
Joanna, let's get right into the deep end here. What does this mean for academic freedom in Australian universities? This win that you've had appears to me to have something that will be a little more widely considered. What are your thoughts here?
Look, I think it is quite a significant win because it was an example of a university imposing a penalty on somebody who researches in a very controversial area and takes on the dominant orthodoxy of the left. So, one of the points I made to the university all throughout this was that there are clear examples of pro-abortion scholars at the University of Adelaide who are not being held to the same standard. They're not being scrutinised in the same way. And, that was one of the reasons why I refused to do the corrective actions that were imposed on me, because it was so fundamentally unfair. So I think the fact that the Commissioner recommended that the corrective actions be lifted, the fact that the university then admitted that they'd been erroneously imposed by removing them, and the fact that we've agreed to a new process going forward, these are all really good, positive things. But, it does point to the challenges for people, for scholars and students who challenge the dominant orthodoxy of the left on campus and the challenge that is and the lack of protection for those people.
So it is a win, but there's something that is certainly most obvious in the fact that there had to be a win here, and that is that if you are a pro-traditional family lecturer in a university like yours, and perhaps let's include every university around the nation, there's a bullying into a woke submission. Is that something that you have observed is so widespread?
I have observed that there's just a microscope on you if you are contesting the orthodoxy of the left. And the left is anti-family, the radical left is very pro-abortion. They contest all of these things that we once held to just be universally true. The fact that there were 2 genders, that biologically that is a truth. The fact that abortion kills a human being. These are things that we all agreed upon once upon a time. And now if you are someone researching those things in the university sector, and it's not just the University of Adelaide, it's across the sector, you are an anomaly and there is a microscope on you. So, in the time that I've been doing this, I have been investigated so many times. It just it's actually relentless to be that person that's just under constant scrutiny because so many complaints are coming in. And what I have tried to communicate to the university is that that is in effect a real handbrake on academic freedom, that by putting a scholar like me just under constant investigation, that is something that then stops me from doing my research. So every university has a commitment to academic freedom in the enterprise bargaining agreement. But the problem is, unless it's proactively enforced to protect people researching in areas of controversy, in effect, they are not protected.
Yes, not protected in areas that are controversial. And it seems to be that university campuses are being engulfed by this cancel culture. I mean, they've tried to cancel you and you've successfully resisted, but there's pressure to protect students from anything that the leaders in the university find offensive. That's something that it's going to take a long time to break that down.
Yes, it is. And I think one of the things that I want to do proactively from my case and my victory is to shine a spotlight on this issue. I've written a letter to Universities Australia, and I've said very clearly that although this is a victory for me, I want it to drive cultural change within the sector. So what that means is there needs to be a process that gets rid of vexatious and bad faith complaints. So just to let the listeners know, Neil, what happened with me is it was a vexatious complaint. It was by someone who had a TikTok account dedicated to attacking me. They produced regular videos attacking me. And I brought this to the university's attention multiple times since they opened up the investigation in January. And each time they refused to take that into account. So there was no recognition of that issue. And so what that meant was they took the investigation forward, even though this person clearly had an axe to grind. So, yeah, look, it's something that universities have to get a handle on, the fact that, and they really should have a handle on it now because we've had cancel culture for quite some time. This is not a new phenomenon. You know, maybe 5 to 7 years ago it was, but now we are very across the fact that if you are doing something controversial, there's going to be a whole lot of activists trying to cancel you. And so that's what has effectively happened to me. There's been an avalanche of complaints to the university since I started doing this. But instead of batting them away and saying these are vexatious, made in bad faith by people with an ideological objection to what I'm researching, instead the university to investigate the complaints. And so I've written to Universities Australia to ask that across the sector a new positive obligation be introduced so that if a person makes a complaint in bad faith or vexatiously, it automatically gets dismissed. I've also requested that the person who makes the complaint needs to either be directly affected by the alleged misconduct or they need to be a person of good standing. And that would then, you know, weed out a lot of these activists who are just, you know, their daily job is to make complaints and to cancel people.
How do you think that's going to be received when your letter arrives? Because making this a specific requirement to mandatorily dismiss complaints which are made vexatiously or in bad faith about the research or conduct of academics, because these are people who are setting themselves in a place of judgment on everything that's being researched in universities. How do you think they're going to receive that?
Look, I don't think they'll want to do what I've said. I think that, you know, what I found even within the University of Adelaide was that I tried to settle this with them 4 times before I eventually went to court. I was very reluctant to go to court because it is just so expensive. And what I found was there was a real inertia to understanding why this was a bad faith and a vexatious complaint. And, you know, I think there's going to be that inertia within the whole academy. But any student who in the classroom has expressed a minority view or any scholar, you know, and I've had a lot of scholars reach out to me since this has all become public. A lot of scholars feel exactly the same way as I do, but they just they feel intimidated and terrified about speaking publicly about it and drawing attention to it. So I do have a petition going at the moment. It's on my website, drjoannahowe.com/free speech. And I am asking people to sign it because we really do need to address this issue the universities are, the training ground for young people before they enter professional life. The whole idea of a university is built on free debate and academic freedom and contesting ideas and that being the way that we discover the truth. And so if only one side ever gets airtime in the classroom and in scholarship, that's really problematic. And, you shouldn't have to be incredibly brave to take on the dominant left on campus, but there should be protections for people that choose to do that.
And we might all be hopeful and prayerful that in universities there might be a pursuit of truth, and that's the thing that is in danger here. But as you say, there is a petition right now. It's active on drjoannahowe.com. And just to pick up on this, Joanna, with all these investigations, and this latest one in particular that really kicked off earlier this year, from what I understand, this has cost you somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000 in legal costs to clear your name here. Is there a way that listeners can be supportive of the sorts of things that you are in the fight for to be able to get this academic freedom across all of our universities?
Thanks, Neil. I appreciate you drawing attention to that. It has been an expensive fight. I tried to resolve it myself because obviously I've got a legal background, and and it's not like I raised new arguments when I got to the commission. That was the interesting thing. I was just saying exactly what I'd said to the university consistently since January. But the difference was Commissioner Platt intervened in the conciliation to make it clear where his opinion lay on everything, and then the university ultimately had to back down. But it shouldn't have cost me, it was actually $98,000. It shouldn't have cost me $98,000 in legal costs to do that. I'm very grateful for Harmer's Workplace Lawyers, the firm that represented me. It's the firm where I started out my employment law career back when I was 21, and they did a fantastic job. They have agreed to write off some of the costs, but it is still obviously very expensive. And I do... I've been accepting donations through my website. So if people are able to give something, even if it's very small, it does all add up. And so, some people have been putting in $10, $20, whatever they can afford. But it's drjoannahowe.com. And I think in the top right-hand section of the website, there's a donate button, and that's been what I've been using for the cost. So very grateful to people for what they've already been putting in, and people who have been spreading the word about the petition on free speech. I'm grateful for that because I don't want this to be just a victory for me. I really want it to be a significant turning point in our nation's culture around higher education. I want that to be the case. I've had my own experiences of publishing on abortion and really struggling to get any traction in Australia. So a couple of years ago, a colleague and I, Professor Suzanne Lemire, we wrote a piece on the rights of doctors to exercise their conscience and not refer for abortion. And we sent that to 3 Australian journals and was unable to get it published. One journal refused outright to even send it to peer review, and the other 2 journals sent it out to peer review. But the problem is if the whole academy is pro-abortion, you are getting your article reviewed by people who just ideologically disagree with what you're saying. And so it doesn't get a fair hearing. And a colleague told us, you're not going to be able to get it published in Australia. The academy is too insular and ideologically driven. You're going to have to send it overseas. So we sent it to the Cambridge Journal of Law and Religion, which is the best journal in the world for that field. And it actually got accepted straight away and was published there. So that was a great outcome for us. But it really shouldn't have to be that hard. And I know firsthand the difference because for my entire academic career up until 3 years ago, I was publishing on vulnerable temporary migrant work. I've never had any problems publishing, but that's because I wasn't contesting the dominant orthodoxy of the left, which is the temporary migrants are vulnerable. Now that I am contesting the pro-abortion orthodoxy of the left through my scholarship, I just, not only is there a microscope on me and I'm just under constant investigation, but I also can't get things published in the academy. So there is this double standard, and it's why I felt I had to fight this. And I'm so glad for the victory. I'm so thankful for the victory. And it was worth every cent because we have to fight back because, our very culture and freedom is at stake.
Joanna, you're headed to Queensland on Monday. You'll be giving evidence to a babies born alive opportunity there to make a submission. How important is that gathering on Monday?
Look, I think it's going to be a landmark day, Neil. I'm actually really excited for it, and listeners may want to really keep this one in their prayers. So this was a bill that Robbie Katter introduced. It's a bill that would give born alive protection to any children born in Queensland after an abortion. And just to give readers some context, there were 42 babies who were tragically born alive, or I should say miraculously born alive after an abortion, but then tragically left to die in 2022, and that's the most recent year we have data for. So that's almost one a week. One of the babies that we do know the story of was little baby Xantha at the Queensland Royal Brisbane and Women's Hospital. This was in 2020. She was 19 weeks gestation. Her parents went in to kill her because she had Down syndrome. So that's why they went in for the late-term abortion. The mother was given MS2-step, which is a pill concoction, and essentially the first pill seeks to starve the baby. The second pill seeks to induce labour so that the baby is delivered vaginally. So the mother goes through labour. Xantha came out alive miraculously and was then dumped in an empty hospital room by herself, and she lay there for 7 minutes struggling to breathe, gasping for air, and she died. So, I think about this inquiry on Monday, and I feel like this is an opportunity for justice for these babies like Xantha, babies like the 42 who we don't know the names and stories of, and the countless babies that came before them. And, it's going to be a difficult day because I know the people leading this inquiry are probably not going to be very supportive of this, but I really do hope that they have an open mind for the evidence that they're going to hear. There's going to be some very brave people speaking on that day, including a midwife who is going to speak about her experiences of witnessing this in her hospital. And so that is a huge thing because I don't think we've ever had an Australian midwife speak on the record about this, and I'm just hoping she has the courage to do what she's committed to do, because it's going to be a big thing for her to do that. It's not going to be a simple, straightforward thing for her to do that. It has implications, I guess, for her whole life and her career. So, this is going to be a big day. The other thing on Monday that's going to happen is a new pro-life health organisation. So I'll ask listeners to go to this website, phpa.com/life. It's phpa.com.life, I think. I should have that right when I speak to you, Neil. Sorry. Pro-Life Health Professionals Australia is a new peak body that will be speaking in to the abortion issue, and they are led by this incredibly courageous woman, senior neonatologist, Dr. Melissa Lai. So, she's also putting her career on the line to lead this organisation, and she will be presenting oral evidence at this inquiry. So I do think it's going to be a groundbreaking day, and I think it will also be a turning point in our national story on how we treat these newborn babies.
And we'll see if we can monitor that along and hopefully be kept in the loop as to any developments that come from that day. Hey, this is important because you've devoted your life to ending abortion. And ideologically, when you talk about babies born alive and the abortion issue overall, there are those on all sides of politics who would believe that these babies don't matter, that they have no value. So going into bat and your profile on the rise, obviously there'll be a lot of listeners who might be hopeful that you'll be getting a good hearing when you do address these sorts of commissions on Monday. Are you finding that with all of the controversies that you've gone through and a win in the Fair Work Commission, all of these things you've gone through, is your voice, do you think, rising in the powers that be? Are they listening?
I do. I think that it is starting to drive some change and some impact. So I find that politicians are approaching me to help them draft bills. And this one in Queensland is one that I helped Robbie Katter draft. We are also looking at drafting some other state-based bills and working with some other politicians on that. So that's a really exciting thing. I also feel that I'm starting to develop relations with journalists. And, the story in The Australian last Saturday was a wonderful opportunity to draw attention to the abortion issue and the freedom issue. So I think that's a really positive thing. But even, with this inquiry, I had presented evidence with Robbie Katter a couple of months ago, and they asked me, surely they sort of said what they tried to say was these babies who are born after an abortion, they're not really people. How do you define a person? And I was able to use my legal expertise to show that in the law we've always defined a person as the moment they're expelled from the mother. Once they're expelled from the mother, and they show signs of life, they're a human being, a human person under Australian law. And it is just really useful to be able to use my legal expertise in this way. And for this inquiry on Monday, I think because I'd sort of exposed some of the politicking and I'd sort of been quite critical of them on my social media, they didn't invite me actually on Monday. And I wrote to them and said, how could you not invite me? I'm the only legal expert that gave a submission out of the 622, and I'm the only legal scholar researching the regulation of children born alive after an abortion. I hope you're not inviting me just because I've criticised you publicly. And, a few days later, sure enough, they'd amended the timetable to invite me to Monday's inquiry. So I do feel that I am starting to get some traction, and there is starting to be some movement, and I think we're going to start to see some wins. I think this bill will pass, and I think the late-term abortion bill that I'm drafting, I think that one will also pass in the next 12 months. So I feel optimistic about the changes that we're going to be able to bring together. I will say to people, if you're able to follow me on Instagram, Dr. Joanna, it's at Dr. Joanna Howe. On Monday, I'm going to be putting real-time live updates on my Instagram, so you're going to be able to see what's going on in the inquiry. And that's probably the social media platform that I most use to communicate about everything. And I know people don't like having social media accounts. I sort of understand that completely. I never had one before I started doing this work. But I have been encouraging people to open just an Instagram account and even just to follow me, because that is a place where I'm really trying to activate and communicate with people in a way that is beyond, the interviews that I do on media in media and things like that. It is a really powerful campaign tool.
Joanna, some callers have been waiting patiently. Let's take a call. Mike is in Tasmania. Hey, Mike, welcome along.
Good morning. I'm the seventh of 8 children, so I'm glad to be alive. And
Yeah.
Dr. Joanna, your labours in the Lord are not in vain. And I hear politicians on the TV saying the deaths in the Middle East must stop, but they ignore the abortion deaths in their own countries.
Joanna, have you got a response here from Mike?
I just want to thank you, Mike, for calling in and also for raising your voice on this. You are absolutely right. It is a genocide in our country. It's 88,000 babies every year who are killed through abortion. And so, in 10 years, we're approaching 1 million on that. And that's just horrific. It's the leading cause of death in our country. It's 240 babies every day that are killed. And it just has to stop. We have to find another way. And, I appreciate your support. And, I think... you said you survived. You're the seventh of 8 children. It is actually true that there's increasing data to show that often, we think of it's the teen mum who aborts her child, but actually data from the state where I live shows that there's a lot of mums who've already got a child who might be in their 30s, and they're the ones aborting. So it's because of this sense, I guess, that, your family size gets too big, it's going to cost too much, and we just have lost that awe of the human being that we once had, and that deep knowledge that each new human person is a gift to our world.
Mike, anything further to add?
No, I'm. Thanks for your comments.
Mike Flood, thank you so much for your call. And our talkback line is open on 1-800 316 316. Interesting to use this word genocide in relation to abortion because, as I understand it, somewhere in the vicinity of 90,000 abortions in Australia each year. And sometimes we're thinking of this, and it's being framed in all sorts of different wording that tries to soften the impact of that. But you've devoted your life into this whole issue here, Joanna, and based on the conviction that abortion actually harms women. I wonder if you've got any thoughts here, because sometimes people are thinking of that bit of tissue or whatever that is expelled when there's an abortion, but the women themselves are also the victims of harm. How do you describe that?
Absolutely. So I will say I use the word genocide very deliberately. I know it will inspire a whole new avalanche of complaints from people, from activists who will disagree. I can't think of any other way to describe the mass slaughter of human beings on this scale, on this magnitude. In terms of the impact on women, that's one of the things that animates me, the fact that we lie to women about what abortion is. I've got good friends who've had abortions, and when they went in for the abortion, they weren't told about the procedure. They weren't told about the experience of the child. And, they are lied to about all of this. The Guardian, after Roe v. Wade was overturned, famously depicted pictures of what a pregnancy looked like at 9 weeks, and they showed the petri dish, and essentially it just looked like a bunch of cotton wool. That's sort of what they showed, and they said that this was pregnancy tissue at this gestation. But what they failed to do was to show the fetus at 9 weeks, the child at 9 weeks, which is actually the size of a strawberry. And so it should be visible to the human eye on a petri dish, but they actually removed the human being from the picture, and it was a disgusting scandal. But that's actually emblematic of the fact that women are lied to about abortion. And there's very well-documented research on the impact on women's mental health, the long-lasting impact on them in terms of grief, higher risk of suicide, higher risk of self-harm, depression and anxiety that comes from this. And, that's one of the reasons I really am fighting for this, is because it kills a human being, but also because it harms women. And we need to deal with the genuine vulnerability that many women face. So research shows that women who get abortion are often choosing it for a mental health or poor socioeconomic reason. 1 in 2 women in Queensland, under a study, showed that they were victims of violence and they were seeking abortion. And I just don't think that killing your child actually resolves any of those issues. If you're in a domestic violence relationship, adding a whole new set of violence to it by brutally killing your child in utero isn't going to get you out of your domestic violence situation. We have to address that, And if a woman is poor or has insecure housing or is having a relationship difficulty, killing their child isn't going to deal with any of those root problems. So I really do think we need to address the root causes of vulnerability rather than funneling women into abortion.
We're taking calls on 1800 316 316. Let's hear from Adam, who's in Wauchope in New South Wales. Hey, Adam.
Good morning. Good morning, Dr. Joanna. You've just beat me to the post a little bit in what I was going to call on, which is the mother's side of all of this. There was a wonderful nurse that called in on the 2020 program a couple of weeks ago when I think Andrew had a gentleman that's been, he was jailed 6 times for protesting out the front of abortion clinics and so forth.
You're talking about Graham Preston, who's been one of those long-time pro-life campaigners, yes, and jailed 6 times.
Yeah, that's right. And one of a lovely nurse called in. She's one of the nurses that actually is there once the mothers wake up after the terrible ordeal, and she gets to see the trauma on their faces and so forth on what actually happens. So I was just ringing the call. You're not only saving the children. The mother thinks they're going in to save them from all this sort of grief and everything else, but you're saving them from a lifelong of heartbreak. I know people that have had abortions, and I know they've had kids afterwards, but they've never been the same. And it's just the underlying deep in the soul disruption to their life that they know they shouldn't have done it, and that's how we're built. But the world's telling them the opposite. And that's all.
Joanna, your thoughts for Adam?
I think thanks, Adam, for recalling that conversation with the nurse. And that's exactly what I have found, because obviously since I've been speaking out about this on Instagram and Facebook, I've been inundated by women who've had abortions telling me of their heartbreak and their pain. And even the women that get angry at me in the direct messages, you can see in their messages how much pain and heartbreak they're experiencing over it, the guilt and just coming to terms with what they've actually done, which is killing their child, and it is just so hard for these women. And I think it's really hard for the nurses and midwives as well who are around it every day, because this is going on every day in hospitals across our country. And, it is just a really heartbreaking situation. And the only way we change it is through talking about it. So I'm glad you called in, Adam. I also think anyone listening we really have a job to do in activating ourselves, educating ourselves. I was silent on this issue for far too long. I woke up, in 2021, and I just thought, I have to do something. I can't let this go because it's got so extreme. And I just, hope that everybody listening will also hear that call, that this isn't just for one or two people to fight, it's for all of us. And we all have a duty to change the hearts and minds of the people around us and to get involved in the pro-life movement.
Adam, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line open on 1800 316 316. Let's take another call. Catherine is in Esperance in WA. Hey, Catherine, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. I'd just like to thank Joanna for her wonderful work and the way that she's standing up in spite of all the opposition. But the Lord goes with you, Joanna. And I was a midwife. I'm retired now. But I'm just wondering, Joanna, about before a termination, is it possible that legally that we can bring in an ultrasound of the baby's heartbeat? And I think once an ultrasound is done, that they will look at it like it's a person. It's a little heartbeat. That's the only protection that baby has, and they won't be able to harm the baby. And also, I'm just wondering about adoption, if that can be promoted more, because there used to be lots of adoptions and now people will just kill their baby rather than allow an adoption. And also the third point, is a post-abortion grief is really real. And these girls that have had an abortion, for every year they'll think that baby would have been 20, 21, and how much it harms that mum. It's not just the baby that's harmed, but the mother.
Catherine, good thoughts there. Let's hear from Joanna.
Yeah, Catherine, they're really good points. And in the US, they have different laws in different states. And the ultrasound law, the requirement that you see your child in an ultrasound before you go through with the abortion, is really good. It does help save lives. We know that from over there. We also know that if there's a mandatory waiting period, so you call the abortion clinic, you have your first appointment, but then you have to wait 72 hours. A lot of women will change their mind with that waiting period. Another really positive reform can be having a counselling session. So there's a mandatory counselling session where you're given proper information about what abortion is, the fetal development of your child at that gestation. A lot of women change their minds again. So we know that the more information, the more time women are given, they are so much less likely to choose abortion. And that's why it's just such a misnomer to call this a woman's choice and to say it's empowering, because actually it's usually really persecuted, vulnerable women in crisis who choose abortion. To your second point, which was, can you help me out? I've had a mental blank.
Catherine? Adoption. Yes, and you're right about that, Catherine. Well, so first of all, I think adoption is just too hard at this point. There's too much red tape around it. It's actually just easier to kill your child through abortion. If there's a domestic violence situation, for example, this woman experienced this and she reached out to me in South Australia. She wanted to go for adoption, but you needed your partner's signature on the adoption form. And this is a violent partner who was pressuring her to abort. And so she ended up choosing abortion, which she feels so much grief about. But she didn't know how to place that child for adoption without the partner's signature. So, there's red tape around it. But it also, the flip side of it is, because abortion is now so easy to get and it's available up until birth and for any reason, there just aren't the babies because it's easier to go the abortion route. And one of the things I'm fighting for is to ban abortion after viability, so after 23 weeks, because that would protect those babies and it would make them available then for adoption. And then your final point about the mother's grief, I do take that point well. I just think these poor women who have been through this, there are counselling services and retreats. So I know in South Australia there's the Emerge retreat. I know in Diamond Women in New South Wales also runs these post-abortive counselling services. Rachel's Vineyard is another organisation. So there is always help out there. And if you call Pregnancy Help Australia through their free hotline, they know what these post-abortion retreats are around the country. And, I just think for all the women who are silently suffering and in pain, there is help out there. Catherine, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316, although we may not be able to take too many calls other than those waiting. Let's hear from Michael in Maruya in New South Wales. Hey, Michael.
Oh, good day, Neil. And
Joanna, what are your thoughts here, Michael?
Well, this might be a hypothetical question, but I just wanted to say, any one of these people that are in favour of abortion, I'd like to say sorry, I just want to say, imagine if you found out that your mother was advised to have an abortion and she refused. What would you do? Would you go to her and say that you shouldn't have refused, you should have gone along with what you wanted to do, or put your arms around her and thank her for giving your life, that you're alive now?
Michael, a very powerful point there. Joanna, a thought here for Michael?
Well, it's something that I've heard said, and I think it's a very smart point, which is that the people advocating for abortion are all the people who made it. They're all the people who've already been born. And, something Dr. Bernard Nathanson said, and he was a famous abortionist from the US who had a conversion once he saw the ultrasound. He said, if wombs had windows, there would be no abortions. And that's true. I think if we can activate people to get this information out there, I really believe it'll drive change on this issue.
Michael, thank you so much for your call. 1-800-316-316, although we'll probably put a line under calls beyond this one. John is in New South Wales. Hey, John.
Oh, hi. I'm just at work at the moment. Hold on. I was just thinking of a scenario. I try to think about both sides of the coin. What would you say to someone who would go, there's so many children being aborted, and it's a horrific scenario, but our school system at the moment, we don't have enough teachers. And if we say banned abortion, people might turn around and say, okay, we've got all these extra children. How are you going to accommodate them without Australia becoming a third world country?
John, important question, and just drawing attention to the fact that Joanna is an expert in labour migration. So immigration is your area too, and there's all sorts of ways that governments are trying to balance the number of residents of Australia. Thoughts here for John, Joanna?
Absolutely. Look, overpopulation is a myth in a country like Australia. We have a declining fertility rate, and it's so concerning. The policymakers are looking at how are we going to replace ourselves. And so if we allow these 88,000 children to be born, that would actually go a long way to addressing this existential crisis that we're facing in terms of Australia. We are having to immigrate more and more people every year just to grow our economy and to build the infrastructure that we need. If we actually produced more people, then we wouldn't need to rely on immigration so heavily. So, the reality is we have an ageing population and we don't have the young people being born who can then support that ageing population. And you see it in China. They're facing huge demographic challenges because of the one China policy that existed for years that saw so many Chinese children be killed, particularly girls. It was disgusting. And yet now China's facing this massive crisis because they just don't have any young people to care for the old people and to do the work that only young people can do. So, one of the key arguments I hear for abortion is, why would you bring children into this world? It's, so messed up. Or why would you bring children into families that don't want them? Or, why would you bring children into a world where we don't have enough resources for them? But at the end of the day, these are human beings, and there should never be a reason to kill an innocent human being. Otherwise, we are really down a dark road, which is the road we're currently on. So we really just have to pull this back and acknowledge that there's never a good reason to kill a human being, and we can work everything else out.
John, thank you so much for your call. A line under calls from here, because running short of time a little now. I want to ask you, Joanna, about some elections that are coming up. There's an election coming up really at the end of this week in the Northern Territory. The ACT is going to have an election, and there's going to be a Queensland state election coming up too in October. I wonder if you've got any thoughts here around what might be happening on both sides of politics for the Queensland state election, because there is a sort of a policy of late-term abortions right up to birth, and this perhaps is one of those grounds where there is some potential for making an impact. What's coming, in your view, for the Queensland state election?
So I would really encourage NT voters going to the polls this weekend to know the stance of the people they're voting for on abortion. That's going to be very important. And in my view, abortion is a litmus test. So if they're good on abortion, they're likely to be good on all of the other issues that you might care about, to do with gender, to do with schools, to do with health. In the Queensland election, this is going to be a really pivotal issue, and I'm going to be doing a lot of campaigning up there. If you have a Katter Party person in your seat, I would encourage you to vote for the Katter Party, because they are the first, party to have introduced a state-based pro-life law in nearly a decade. So, I really would encourage people to get behind the Katter Party. And then if you are in a seat without a Katter Party MP, you're really going to have to look at the pro-life stance of your person, because in Queensland, late-term abortions have doubled in just 3 years. Stephen Miles was the Premier when he was the Health Minister. He's the Premier now, but he was the Health Minister that introduced abortion up to birth and for any reason. And he told the Parliament at the time, late-term abortions aren't going to increase under my law. That's a pro-life myth. And yet, fast forward 3 years, they've gone up from 152 babies killed in 2019 to 304 in 2022. So that's just... It's so significant, and it has to be stopped. And so we urgently need a new parliament in Queensland so that we can get an inquiry into this, and so we can then ban late-term abortion. So if people want to know more about that, if you go to drjoannahowe.com/Miles Lives, that'll come up with the information you need, and you can sign that petition there, and that'll get you in the campaign on the Queensland bill, on the Queensland election. I'll be sending you some information about how to vote.
And just pick up that little tip there, because when you do visit Joanna's website, it is also a wonderful resource for understanding what's going on. Hey, just before I let you go, Joanna, there's some initiatives that are going on. I know that a lot of our listeners have participated in a wonderful initiative from the Australian Christian Lobby about knitting baby booties that go on display outside Parliament House in Canberra, and it makes a tremendous display, and those baby booties representing children who've not made it into this world. There are some initiatives like that you'd be encouraging listeners to participate in?
Absolutely. So the Australian Christian Lobby does a wonderful job of organising the annual Baby Booties display outside Parliament. I was there on Wednesday this week. I just flew in for that event. I actually had a terrible sore throat, and I was coming down with a cold, but I felt quite emotional about getting there, because it is this one day in the year where we commemorate all of the lives lost to abortion in our nation's capital. And there were 5,000 baby booties. And, that actually replicates the number of lives lost to late-term abortion in Queensland and Victoria between 2010 to 2020. There was 4,929 babies killed. So the booties, as we looked at them, really was this stark reminder that they actually represented an individual person. And then looking at them, 17 times that number is the amount of babies killed every year in Australia. So it was a fantastic opportunity to draw attention to that. And I want to thank listeners who get involved, giving money, knitting booties, spreading the word. This is the heart and soul of the pro-life movement, and I just want to encourage people to keep going, because we are going to win this. We're going to win it in my lifetime. We're going to make abortion unthinkable, because there is no other option. We have to win because of what's at stake.
We have to make abortion unthinkable. And to connect with Dr. Joanna Howe, you can do so at her website, drjoannahowe, Joanna Howe, HOWE.com, drjoannahowe.com. Joanna did mention her Instagram to follow through with the evidence that she's going to be presenting at a gathering in Brisbane coming up early next week. That's Dr. Joanna Howe follow her on Instagram. Just to mention too, Joanna's also authored a number of books. Some of those are in regard to labour migration, and that's her real area of expertise as well. And you might want to even support Joanna and perhaps send her a encouraging note, but even more importantly, perhaps even than that, keep her in your prayers. And you may even want to make a donation too, as I mentioned a little earlier when we talked about the legal challenges that she has faced. Significant legal challenges, somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000 coming out of her pocket to defend herself with the woke university status. She's got some wonderful ideas, some great programs and initiatives ahead to try and head off at the pass those vexatious complaints that can really hinder those academics from actually putting forward a truthful way of presenting their case on all sorts of these difficult issues. So to connect with Joanna, drjoannahowe.com. Joanna, thank you so much for taking some time to put your thoughts out there and to interact with listeners. Just wonderful having you on 2020.
Thank you, Neil, and wonderful to be with you all.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.